Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Yeah, now we're getting into some albums. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the fifth album by Black Sabbath, is considered by many to be one of the best, if not the best, Black Sabbath album in their discography. That includes a lot of different singers, a lot of different musicians. However, this one is considered by a lot of people to be their favorites. And for me, it's definitely my favorite in the Ozzy era. It beats Paranoid by a narrow margin, and Master of Reality by an even slimmer one. This is just a very fantastic album. Not to mention, this was also the first album that critics initially found favor with whenever it was first released. Up to this point, with the first four records that were put out, Black Sabbath Volume 4, Paranoid, and Master of Reality, the critics really didn't enjoy the albums at first and didn't find favor into them until afterwards, whenever the fans, the public, society really accepted this album immediately. That's whenever the critics opted to sort of change their tune a little bit and reevaluate. It's one of those classic examples that critics don't always know what they're talking about. However, as a critic myself, I also admit the fact that I sometimes happen to be wrong, but more often than not, I'm not. That sounded really jerkish of me, and I don't even give a shit. But Sabbath Bloody Sabbath is a Bloody Sabbath classic. It's one of those albums that you can immediately know the songs that are on it. They've been covered many times by many different artists: Anthrax, Metallica, Anal Cunt, just to name a few. And it's also an album that is just very nicely put together. The flow on this album is phenomenal. And these were songs that, even though the craftsmanship on them may seem at some points to be extremely basic, it may not seem like there's that great degree of a shift between the first four albums and Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. There certainly is something there. Something that maybe can't be pinpointed by words. Something that may purely be on a sonic level. That does make this album superior. That does make all the difference in the world. The songwriting on this album was very well done. And for trying to recreate the atmosphere of Volume 4, which for me was an album that was relatively weak compared to these others, that's something that's very difficult to say. Typically, whenever you opt to recreate the environment, the result is either an album that's on par with the previous one, or a little bit weaker. But instead, this album was better. In fact, this album was worlds better. Number 5 is number 1. Think about it. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, the track itself. Sabracadabra, National Acrobat, Killing Yourself to Live, Spiral Architect. All songs that have been covered by others. All songs that have a certain degree of personality to them. And all tracks that really showcase the band at their highest point, at their highest level during the Ozzy Osbourne era. Ozzy's vocals are all very focused. Ozzy's vocals are all very crisp and sinister and clean. You know, the band's, work behind him. Tony Iommi just sounds marvelous on this album, writing some of his most memorable riffs on this record. Geezer Butler's just thumping away. Ward's everything's just going at it. Everything is just very, very nicely connected. It's almost as though the band itself connected completely with Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Like whenever they went in with these sessions, these were songs that were very easily crafted. These were songs that easily were punched out and put on the reel. Of course, we all know that that is certainly not the case, considering the drug problems that the band was undertaking. But this is one of those albums where you almost want to get into drugs, especially if you're a musician, because you hear the glory, you hear the majesty, you hear how fantastic the material is, and then you discover that they were in an altered state of mind, and you immediately start to think, maybe those great moments, maybe those great songs are there in my mind, only they're in unexplored territory. Territory that I don't dare tread unless my mind is altered. Unless my mind is under the influence of something that helps me get to that place. Whatever the reason might be, this is an album that has superior flow. From track 1 to track 8, it's something that feels very connected. It's something that engages you because the riffs are very well thought out. It's something that also engages you because these are not songs that are going to maintain the same riff the entire time. Instead, they are dynamic. And this is finally an album that shows what superior musicianship and superior connectivity amongst the band can really achieve. Because this is a band that not only felt and seemed like they were very reinvigorated, but it also just felt as though they were writing and recording 8 great tracks for the very first time as a band. This is like that grace period, that honeymoon period, where everything is just peachy. And this is kind of an album that reflects that. No, is the mood peachy keen? Is everybody happy and all that stuff on this album? Absolutely not, but it's the overall feeling about it. It's almost like the band itself was flowing at its peak. It's reached that musical plateau. And somehow, some way with this album, instead of falling off of the plateau, it went upward, turning the plateau into a stepping stone-like mountain, and trying to reach the crest, the snowy crest. However, the snowy crest in this particular case was going to be the increased usage of the drug cocaine by Ozzy Osbourne. In the next couple of years in Ozzy and Black Sabbath's career were going to be troubling. There was still great music to be made, but there were also massive hurdles for them to jump over. Stay tuned and we'll discuss those as the Black Sabbath discography continues here on the Cover Killer Nation channel.